Assalamu alaikum. We have been looking at William Wordsworth for the past few days, and we've seen him as a critic and a poet so far. We saw how he was important or instrumental in bringing about the Romantic movement. Well, he was not alone. There were others, other poets like Shelley, Byron, Keats, Coleridge. All of these prominent literary figures contributed to the successful movement, what came to be called Romantic movement. But he sort of pioneered with his movement away from, because see, for any action there has to be an excessively strong reaction. Only then that action could be curbed, right? So in response to the neoclassical verbosity or neoclassical straightedness, he Wordsworth sort of bulldozed into, like, rushed into the defense of natural poetic diction. So you see, what came about was a balance in the form of subject, the choice of subject, in the choice of diction. Okay, all of it. So we saw a little, to sum it up, we saw a little bit about his limitation as a critic. But what we see is a kind of steady maturity, a steady growth in the way he perceived the language of poetry should work, right? We saw a little bit about the Romantic movement, how it came about in the Europe, and some of the key figures of the Romantic movement, his poetry, his critical works, with special attention to his preface to the lyrical ballads. We saw a little bit about the neoclassical poetic diction. As I said earlier, you need to have a very strong reaction to any action. So this was the action to which Wordsworth responded with his new form of substance and diction. And yeah, so Wordsworth proposed a kind of poetry that would be, the principle of which was to the objective of which was to choose incidents and situations from common life in a selection of language really used by men. Okay, so it should. He also believed that it should not differ from good prose, and to it he wanted to add language of men, true taste and feeling. He wanted to add superact meter that would prove that would help you help make it different from prose. So Wordsworth's concept of poetic diction, well, he finally agrees with the neoclassics that it is okay to use lofty language for great poetry, but he also did not resort to it blindly, okay, as the neoclassics did, classical writers did. So none of his poetry, though, is written in a selection of language really used by men. This is one of the charges laid down by Coleridge. So language of poetry, his concept of poetry. What is language of poetry? To him, poetic art should be spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. To him, poetic art is nothing but spontaneous, as in sudden overflow of powerful feelings. Emotion recollected in tranquility. Now it is deliberate. So initially he said it was a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. What is poetry? Poetry is something that erupts out of you when your feelings are very, very powerful, very, very strong. And but they are deliberated, even though it's like, it's like a flood. It's like a flood. It's just like, it's so powerful, it's so strong. But then you but then the emotion is recollected in tranquility. You are tranquil, you are at ease when you are recollecting the emotion. Okay, it's not spontaneous anymore. Even though it is spontaneous, it has been sort of given some stops, as if a dam has been constructed to hold on to the flood, to reduce the intensity of the flood. Okay, expressed in a selection of language really used by men. So how is it expressed? It is very powerful feelings, but then these powerful feelings are emotions, are turned into emotions, or recollected in tranquility when you are at ease, but in a language that is used by men, really used by real men actually. So, but he never composed verses without greatest care. Of course, he composed them in tranquility. That's why whatever poem you see of his are brilliant. It is true to second words as of second thoughts that they are best. See why this quote is important is because he also wanted you not to merely pour away your emotions, but to pour it in the sense that you revise it again, okay, with the intent of revising it again. So he too believed, like Pope, that it is not okay to simply write whatever you feel. You have to rethink it sometimes, okay, to create good poetry. So what is the function of poetry? It stands, yeah, it stands or falls by its effect on the reader. So the poetry does not exist merely for me. So I am going to write a poetry, I'm going to write some poem. It is an overflowing of powerful emotions, and I have recollected in tranquility. It's all me, okay? The poet is of prime importance first. But what is the function of it? Should it be restricted to me alone? Am I writing for myself? Of course, I find a certain enjoyment in creating poetry. But would the enjoyment be restricted? Would it be a selfish enjoyment? No. Apparently, he says that it stands or falls by its effect on the reader. Whether or not the poem is successful, it depends on the reader. If the reader is capable of understanding it and appreciating it, well and good. You have succeeded in creating good poetry. Or if nobody seems to understand it, and even if they understand, they are unable to appreciate it because either it is too dull or it is too aggressive, well, obviously it's a failure. So the poet is a man speaking to men. So who's a poet? Poet is a man speaking to men in general. So you don't sit on a pedestal and everyone at your feet. Okay, the poet is not supposed to behave like that because see, some of the poems written by Milton are like those, as if like he is up there and and he doesn't give a care as to who understands him or not. He expects everyone to rise up to his level. Well, it is in a scholarly sense, it is a good thing, but for genuine appreciation of poetry, it is quite well, disadvantages. So pleasure seems to be the poet's main concern, whereas moral gain is of foremost importance comparatively. So he is not merely asking for aesthetic pleasure, he is asking for instruction as well. He says the poet should be concerned not only with, you know, giving pleasure to the reader, but also some instruction. It should also teach, entertain as well as instruct. Yeah. Aesthetic appeal brought about by meter, rhyme, expression, recurrence to a subject is only secondary but necessary. Man, nature, human life, while form the basis of a poet's subject, truth, grandeur, beauty, love, and hope give emphasis to those subjects. So see, it is triple fold, okay? See, first off, aesthetic appeal is necessary. It is brought about by meter. Meter, how it is composed, the rhyme scheme in it, how it is expressed, the choice of words used in it, and the recurrence to a subject, how the subject is, how the subject is approached. All of it brings in some aesthetic appeal. It makes the subject pleasing, okay, pleasing to read, pleasing to hear. Whereas man, nature, human life form the basis of the poet's subject. So what is the basis of poet's subject? Man. He should speak about mankind in general. He should relate to the nature. He should relate to the human life, how what the interactions of the human life include, right? The philosophy behind the human life. All of it should be the basis of the poet's subject. But it is truth, grandeur, beauty. See, these are the metaphysical aspects. Okay, these are the metaphysical aspects to the very physical aspect of man, nature, and human life. These metaphysical aspects give substance to the physical, okay, without relating to man in a truthful nature, without bringing grandeur to nature, without bringing beauty and love and hope to human life, these will fall flat. These subjects will fall flat. So he is not merely giving us directives as to how to bring about aesthetic appeal or what subjects to use. He is also telling us how to use those subjects, how to approach those subjects. So truth, grandeur, beauty, love, and hope should be the emphasis to those subjects. Okay, give emphasis to those subjects. So again, speaking of the poet, he says who a poet is. Okay, he says great. The poet feels a great power, has a great power to feel and express, and has ready access to reader's heart. The poet has very great power. He feels very strongly and has access to reader's heart and is able to express as well. So there are people who can feel but do not express. Unfortunately, they turn out to be very bad poets. But those who can feel and express, though the expression and feeling never can be balanced out, still it's some form of expression. Poetry is a pursuit of truth. Okay, poetry is merely it's an activity, a pursuance. It looks for truth. It searches for truth. Man's knowledge of himself and world around him, necessary part of our existence. Poetry looks for truth in man's knowledge of himself and the world around him, and which is the necessary part of our existence. Okay, and because what's the point? We'd be living it, living it in a kind of blind state, right? If we do not know ourselves, if we have no knowledge of ourselves, of course, some may argue what we know about ourselves is enough. That we know that we are called so and so, that is our name, that we belong to so and so, our community or religion or caste or whatever, or that we do so and so, whatever our physical everyday chores are. Yeah, this is how we form our identity, right? By our name, our profession, our religion, our ID card, yes, of what we do, by our friends possibly, right? So this is the core of our identity, at least on a physical level. But he is talking about poetry giving us the kind of truth that is necessary for us to live better lives, to be better humans. Okay, so man's knowledge of himself as an in-depth knowledge, deeper knowledge, and the world, how the man relates to the world around him, not merely people, to everything, to a cat, to a dog. I mean, there are people who are ambivalent about those things, like how you respond to the flower, to the nature around you, to the hilltops, to a sunrise or to a sunset. Yeah, everything, how we relate to it, and what is the truth behind it. So this is the necessary part of our existence. Science has the same pursuit, but material. See, science pursues truth. Science looks for truth. It tries to validate truth. It always looks for positive and negative, right? But it is purely material. Whereas poetry is, beyond material. It's essential. Poetry is therefore breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. What is poetry? Breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. There are all kinds of knowledge, but poetry is something that gives air, the necessary life-giving source to every knowledge that we have. It is the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. So Wordsworth believes that it is the impassioned expression which is the countenance of all science, as in every science has its own expression, but poetry is the impassioned expression of all sciences. Okay, to console the afflicted, to add sunshine to daylight, by making the happy happier, to teach the young and the gracious of every age to see, to think and feel, and therefore to become more actively and securely virtuous. Poetry does all of it. It consoles the afflicted, the one who is heartbroken. It consoles that person. To add sunshine to daylight by making the happy happier. The daylight is there, but it adds sunshine to it. It makes it all the more beautiful and makes the happy person happier. To teach the young and the gracious of every age to see. Right? To teach the young and the gracious of every age to see, to think and feel. He teaches everyone to see, not merely to see, but to think. And not only to think, but to feel. and therefore to become more actively and securely virtuous. So it makes you feel as if you are a part of a larger system, because see, when we are within ourselves, we are so self-centered, we're so selfish that we tend to not look beyond us. But poetry is something that makes you at par with everyone. You feel like you are a part of the whole. As in, when you listen to a poetry, when you read a poetry, it makes you feel as if, yes, those experiences are relatable to you, especially when those, I'm talking about very good poetry, okay? So when those experiences, when those verses give you a sense of belonging to a larger system, to a more magnificent system, you tend to work towards it. You tend to want to be more appealing to that system, right? So everything that you do, everything you do reflect, you begin to believe, has to be, has to be deserving of that system, right? Of the larger universe, of the larger nature you belong to. You feel that you have to, work up to its magnificence. So poet is an ultimate teacher. Okay, poet is ultimately a teacher. It teaches you to be more virtuous. It teaches you to be more kind. It teaches you to be more sympathetic. It teaches you to be generous. It teaches you to be forgiving. Yeah. No science would tell you that. No science would tell you to go and forgive people. Well, only poetry does that to you, right? So, a poet is a man speaking to men who has greater knowledge of human nature and a more comprehensive soul. See, this is a very necessary quality, I believe, because you come across so many poems that don't make any sense at all, or at least are of no significance at all. I will totally, absolutely concur with Wordsworth on this point, that a poet has to have greater knowledge of human nature. Okay, he has to be, he has to be in sync with the psychology of human mind and what is good for him, and a more comprehensive soul. His soul should be attuned to all good things. Okay, he should be able to see, there are all kinds of people and you listen to them speak, but there are very few who leave a mark on you, who make a mark on you, right? Your personality is transformed when you come across them. When you meet them, you listen to them for a few minutes and your whole life seems to change. Well, Coleridge had that kind of personality, it seems. I mean, if you look at Hazlitt's work on Coleridge, you'll find that Coleridge was really, had that kind of, transformative personality. I mean, that would bring about transformation in other people, not himself. Anyway, so a poet is supposed to have, has to have a knowledge of human nature, and should have more comprehensive soul, who rejoices more than other men in the spirit of life that is in him. He should be able to rejoice in the spirit of life within him. He should be able to live life fully, completely, and enjoy that life, appreciate the gift that has been given to him by God. Yeah, only then he would be able to put in that appreciation, show in that appreciation to other people, give them the hope that is required to live through a very dull life, right? So a poet has to have the joy, the spirit within him, that would automatically communicate through the words he writes to his reader. That's why when you read that, the poem Daffodils, I know it's a very very simple poem, but then it just seems to, take you to a transcendental stage. you know it transcends all boundaries of time and space, and I don't think I've ever seen an actual daffodil in my life. Maybe artificial flower somewhere, at a party or something. I have never seen a daffodil, honestly. But whenever I think of daffodils, I recall the poem, and it just seems to, it's as if, like, they are best friends. We are best friends. And the loneliness that goes along with, it, which is more aloneness rather than loneliness in his poetry. He is like, he starts with something like this: I wandered lonely as a cloud. Well, he is alone, But he's not lonely, even though he says he uses the word lonely there, because everything he says after that communicates that he is at par with nature. He has this huge majestic company around him that God has created. The nature, the clouds, the hills around him, the valley, the field of daffodils, golden daffodils. He calls them golden daffodils. Of course they are beautiful. I mean, in my imagination they are very, very beautiful. So you see, he has that spirit of life that communicates automatically through his poetry. To him, poet is an uncommon man. The man is not a common man. See, all the while he was talking about, I mean, while we were talking about the poetic diction proposed by Wordsworth, he insisted on using the language of common men, right? And the choice of subject should be of a common life, rustic life. He believes the poet should be uncommon. Okay? Despite the choice of subject and the diction, he feels the poet should be an uncommon man. In what sense should he be uncommon? Because he should be superior to common folk. So one may argue how an uncommon man who is superior to common folk will be able to write upon a common subject or in a common language. So that question we need not ask, because Coleridge had already asked it once. Anyway, plenty of times. Poet, not one to present facts, writes with the necessity of giving immediate pleasure to a human being, not as a lawyer, a physician, a mariner, an astronomer, or a natural philosopher, but as a man. So the poet writes not to present facts. He is not going to give you any facts, but the kind of facts he gives would be beyond or better than the facts, actual facts or realities of life. See, he writes with the necessity of giving immediate pleasure to a human being, not as any of these, but as a man. Okay, a lawyer gives his own perspective. If you ask him about, say, marriage, he would talk about, he would start, start talking about NODs, or he would start talking about, I don't know, divorce or whatever. But okay, that was a very wrong or inappropriate analogy. Excuse me. But yeah, I believe, see, for instance, a star. An astronomer would give you state some facts about how a certain star belongs to a certain constellation and could be found at a certain point of time at night, or how it could be, how the star is supposed to have been born, or when, or the age of the star, or its supposed death, when it would be, when the stars die, all of it. Yeah, he is possibly relating to facts. I mean, they are unreliable, they are mere assumptions, but then when you talk about stars, the astronomer will have a certain specific idea, or he would be relating those ideas as facts, whereas the poet is not concerned with facts. To him, a star is something that guides. Yeah, something that pleases, that's something that gives you company when you're so lonely and so cut off from the world. A star would be something that helps you connect with, or makes you feel like you're connecting with uh, a loved one you've lost. Or a star could be so many things. A star could be a figure you idolize and who's no more, right? A star could be so many things. But these many things, these various connotations I'm talking about right now, all of these connotations could be easily appreciated by any man. Okay, it need not be it could be a farmer, it could be an astronomer, it could be a lawyer. They all of them would be able to connect with the poet on this concept. Will be able to appreciate this connotation of the word star when the poet speaks of it, right? So he is an uncommon man, superior to common folk, but he writes not facts, but with the necessity of giving immediate pleasure. So here, pleasure would be of any kind. Already we have spoken, I believe, when we were talking about Aristotle, yeah, dealing with the Aristotelian chapter. We spoke of how the various kinds of pleasure were there. There was the pleasure brought about the comic, the pleasure, the tragic pleasure, all of it, right? So it could be any kind of pleasure. So please do not, whenever we speak of pleasure, please do not restrict it to one kind of emotion. Okay, I guess we've I think we are running out of time. Yeah, I'll stop here and continue in my next video. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.